silent. Can I ask Shed to open with a karakia, please?
Morena tātou, kia koe rā Anne, tātou katoa ko huitahi nei, i ngā mema o Bay Venues, tēnā koutou, me ki rā i ngā kaimahi katoa, tēnā tātou katoa. Morena, kia nui tātou. He honore he korore ki te atua, he maunga rongo ki te whenua whakaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa. E te atua tēnei mātou o punangi ne tēnei ki a koe i tēnei ata, ka tuku ngā whakamaumeti, ngā whakawhetai ki a koe, mai manaakitanga katoa. Manaakiti rā tātou katoa i ngā hotanga i ngā take, e ata whiriwhiri hia nei rā tātou i tēnei ata. Nō reira te atua, tēnei mātuina tēnei ki a koe, korore ki tōnga tapu. Āmene.
Thank you very much. No apologies this morning. We haven't got Shane Lai from Master Builders Association in talking to us this morning. He's unable to attend. He's got a prior commitment. We have no late items, although we have some late additions to items. We don't need to formally adopt late papers, no. There is no business to be transferred from public excluded to open. There's no change of business that I'm aware of. That brings us then to the minutes of the council meeting held on the 29th of May. So any alterations, any queries from those? Yeah. Bill's moving, it's a true and correct record. And Stephen seconding. Any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. And then the extraordinary meeting on the 6th of June to adopt the dog fees, registration fees. Shad moving and Bill seconding. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. So that, any declarations of conflicts of interest to register? No. We have no deputations, presentations or petitions. That brings us, no recommendations from other committees, brings us to the business of today. And we start off with the review of council funding of Bay Venues. I can see Simon and Chad there. Come on up, gentlemen, welcome. Good morning. And Paul. And Anne. Oh my goodness. It's a whole triumvirate up there.
I would just like to take.
Is this what I've got here? Or is that the same as that? Right, okay, yep. So I've got that. Good morning.
Kia ora koutou. Joined by Simon Clark, our board chair as well, and thank you for the opportunity to come back to you and speak to you about funding for Bay Venues. We are aware that we've had some conversations at different times with you over probably the past 12 months where you have asked us to make sure that we come to you and talk to you about what's required to ensure that Bay Venues is financially sustainable in the long term. And so this paper is a culmination of a lot of work that's been put in cooperatively between ourselves and Paul and his team at council to make sure that we come up with the right solution to enable that to be able to happen in the long term. I think it's probably worth just really emphasising the fact that we are a community-driven organisation, and that's why we've been established to make sure that we can deliver the facilities and the recreational spaces that we do for the community. And so that value that we deliver is important to the city. We're really trying to operate with the fact that we can be, as a CCO and as a business, that we can be commercial in mind, but with the community at heart of everything that we do. And so getting the balance in that is always the challenge that we have, and that's what we're working towards. So to enable us to be financially sustainable, we've identified there are kind of three challenges, and this paper is we recognise quite complex. There are a number of elements to that. I'm sure as you've been looking through it, you would have acknowledged that. What we've tried to do is simplify it a little bit and bring it back to what are the key issues that we're dealing with and what are the options for addressing that moving forward. So those three issues are really around the historical underfunding of depreciation. And that has meant that as an organisation, we've had to fund some renewals on assets, particularly around Bay Park and at the stadium, and also places like the Adams Centre, to make sure that we can look after those facilities for the long term. We've been doing that and using debt to fund that, which probably isn't the best way to do that. So that's the first issue that we've identified and tried to address. The second one is around the level of operating funding and the subsidy that we receive from council. What we've found over the last few years, and COVID has probably masked this to some degree with the ups and downs that we've encountered, particularly the downs through not being able to trade at times, is that our cost profile has increased significantly, and everyone's aware of the way that costs are going up, whether that's our electricity contract, which has gone up by 34%, moving to becoming a living wage employer, which is a great result in helping us to attract and retain staff. But there's a 9.9% increase in the living wage rate, which is about to come through. So those are just two examples. There's plenty more of areas where we're getting hit with extra costs. And traditionally, where we've been able to attract new business into our venues as the population has grown, because there's been or no investment in new facilities over that time, we're at that point where our facilities are pretty much at or near capacity. So therefore, we just can't attract more business easily into the venues. So therefore, our revenue growth is capped, but our costs are increasing dramatically. On top of that, there are also pressures from a compliance point of view around security, sustainability, and things like that. So that's a real challenge for us. The third issue that we wanted to look at was around the capital structure of the organisation. And because of the above two reasons, so COVID in particular also hit us with our operating deficits, and the funding of depreciation, that has meant that our debt has grown disproportionately over the last three or so years. So we want to address that and bring that back into balance. And so we are recommending rebalancing the debt with an equity conversion of debt to equity, which has no significant impact on council's balance sheet, given that it's a consolidated approach to things. So those are the three areas that we've addressed. It does mean a significant increase in funding, and we recognise that and we acknowledge that. But for Bay Venues to be financially sustainable in the long term, it's important that we do this. If you chose not to increase the funding, then there's probably a couple of options that could be looked at. One would be to let things continue as they are and let the debt continue to mount up over time, which probably isn't the smartest way to be able to approach that. The other option could be to say, well, we want Bay Venues to be financially sustainable, but we don't want the debt to grow, so therefore how do we cut costs? And that would probably result in cutting services, and whether that would mean reducing the number of programs we did, reducing operating hours, or potentially closing some facilities. That would be probably the only way to try and reduce costs significantly. But in an environment where we've got a growing population and more demand, again, that doesn't feel like the most appropriate way to deal with it. So hence the recommendation that we've come up with, which is articulated in the paper. So happy to take any questions on that.
Paul, did you want to make some comments?
So Chad has summarised it very well. Probably just a few things that I'll point out. One is just around the debt to equity conversion. To explain that, so we have incurred already that $15 million of debt. So there's no additional debt. I think I may have said in the past that there would be if that was used for anything else but equity transfer effective in there. What that effectively means is that would realise that debt into council, which is where the $900,000 of foregone interest effectively goes. So that's the financial impact of that transaction. It's not a balance sheet impact, but it is a rating impact effectively coming through that. The other comment that's probably just worth calling out is that the depreciation that we're looking at funding exceeds the amount of non-funded in the past due to that catch-up. So there is an element of that we would need to continue to look at that into the future to make sure that remains at the right funding level. But overall, Chad, is the three elements are effectively there to put Bay Venues in a situation where they can actually continue to operate and fund and do break even or better effectively into the future.
Simon, do you want to?
No, I haven't got anything more to add, really, Anne. I mean, I guess the only comment would be that, the board and Chad and the management team will also be very focused on the cost profile of the business going forward. So this isn't about getting a whole lot of money to frit away. There'll be a, relentless focus on the costs of the business to ensure that we're getting the best value for money for the community, as well as a focus on the, community outcomes that we're delivering.
Thank you very much for that. I think, Chad, you summed it up really well. And when you read the report, it's not pleasant reading to see the legacy that's been left to BVL by really decisions that haven't been made and changes that haven't been made over numerous years. But we knew that actually when we came in here as commissioners, and that we've said all along, we appointed a new board after going through some deep discussion and an external review. Well, I think there were several external reviews. We now have in place a really good board, and Chad, it was really good to hear you sum that up by saying that the description that you had of the role of BVL, which is with its heart in the community but its head in the commercial sector, and I think that is good for us to hear, because it was that we were looking for from the new BVL board. But I think we said right at the time when we appointed the new board that we did need to sort out the finances, because it was evident even then the underinvestment, the state of the facilities, and the growth of the city just meant that it was all getting too hard, and the service that could be delivered was less than optimal. So it's a very good report that brings the whole lot to light, and really, in order to keep such a highly competent board, I think on council's behalf, we have to respect that situation and deal with it. Otherwise, Simon, your board members are facing an impossible task. And with the calibre of board that we have currently, there's huge opportunity, and I don't think we want to lose them. Having said that, we're going into an open workshop later on the start of the long-term plan, which is looking difficult. You face cost increases, so have we. So whilst the recommendations here today are what we need to do, the speed and our ability to do that will be part of those further conversations. But I did want to take the opportunity, particularly Simon, while you and Chad are here, to compliment you on the work that BVL's done to date, and particularly working closely over a couple of years now to bring this financial situation to light. It's clearly, it is complex, but it is clearly laid out, the difficulties, and to you, Simon, the board's really particularly well despite all of that. Any questions or comments, Stephen?
Thanks, Chair. I totally agree with your sentiments, and very happy to support the recommendations. To me, this is about achieving transparency about where the revenue comes from and where it's going to, which wasn't the case in the past. And one of the key aspects of transparency is about funding things like depreciation, that you can't keep on running down your assets and expect it not to then bite in the future. And we are feeling the bite now from past decisions of not providing for depreciation and obviously therefore the renewal and maintenance of our core network. And it does ripple through to fees and charges, and we'll have that conversation later, that yes, you can keep your rates down and you can keep your fees and charges lower, but you'll end up paying a price in the future, and that's exactly what we're experiencing now. So I do support the recommendations. I'm happy to move them. But I did have a query about, and this is on page, comes up. Oh, it's the attachment about the allocation of funded and non-funded activities. I can't find the page number, it's not coming up for some reason. But anyway, Bay AV and Bay Events are both included in the funded networks. And I'm just wondering, I mean, we're always going to have this balance about what's commercial and what's not. But if there was a couple of areas that I thought were more commercial, it was Bay AV and Bay Events. Now, I appreciate you can run those with a public good component, which has probably tipped them in. But I just wonder, we don't want to be in a situation where ratepayers are subsidising what should be normal commercial activities. That was the basis of my question.
Yeah, I'm happy to respond to that. So Bay Events probably really doesn't operate as such. So when we talk about running events, we operate purely as the venue. So we're not actually taking any risk in running events. There might be the odd smaller thing that we do, but it's pretty negligible. So there's actually nothing there of note. Bay AV is probably one that I can understand your thinking around that. The challenge that we have with Bay AV is that because we operate it within the venue, probably half of the work that they do is actually looking after the venue. So it's making sure that the PA system in the arena or the stadium is set and ready to go. It's making sure that the power supplies are in the right place. So there's actually a whole lot of work that goes on which isn't paid for by clients. That we have to do to make sure that the venue is set. So you're right, it is one of those ones where it's a bit of a balancing act. We do a little bit of external work, but we have also made sure in response to concerns from council to make sure that we're not competing wholly in the private sector as well. So we've limited what we do in that regard. And that means that we are limited with how much that we can do commercially.
Thanks, Chad. And I think that covers it for me, but I think the message back to the board would be to constantly be probing in those areas. It's one of the reasons we have a separate BVL to identify opportunities where commercial revenue can be brought whilst achieving the balance on public service. So, and that's an example of where that might apply. Happy to move the recommendations, Chair.
Bill, second.
And certainly just picking up the Chair's comments in terms of the report, but also in terms of where BVL or what BVL has achieved in the relatively short time the new board and management have been in place. It was just around and the report talks about the number of ageing facilities, in fact, going back to 80 odd years. So with the funding of depreciation and a more sustainable funding model, I just wanted a bit of comment, Chad, in terms of the time frames to address those ageing community funded facilities who have really been, and no fault of BVL, really been a poor cousin because of the lack of investment over a long period of time.
Yep, really good question. There are probably a number of elements to how we address that moving forward. And a lot of this is tied up with the long-term plan that we have submitted our proposals and bid cards and things through into the council team. So the first element is looking after what we've got, which we absolutely see as a key priority. And through that, we have proposed, I think it's $92 million of renewals expenditure through the long-term plan to effectively replace and renew the assets that we've got. We've also proposed, I think at the moment, $53 million of new capital works on the existing facilities. So to try and bring them up to speed and look after them. So that will be, I guess, a focus over the next 10 years. There might be a little bit more of that over the first 3, but primarily spread out over the 10 years. And then alongside that, in terms of new facilities to deal with the growing population, things like the Memorial Park project, obviously that's funded as well through the LTP. And so we're working with council around the timing of when those new facilities would come on stream and how they would be delivered. So kind of 3 elements to that.
Thanks, Chad. Yeah, I do support the comments of my fellow commissioners. I suppose kind of in the back of my mind is, I suppose what we're sitting here today is to try and give you and the board some confidence and assurance that we've got the structures right, we've got things set in place, particularly when, from a commission perspective, we've probably got 12 months left in terms of our tenure. So we do want to set the path right in terms of the activities and delivering on the outcomes before you. I do want to pick up on Stephen's point as well about the AV. We did have drew some criticism about that competing in the commercial sector, and just want to make sure that we, in terms of what we are doing, doesn't cut across that. And I think you've already kind of answered that question, but just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, I'm going right back into the early days. I think that's one of our early LTP submissions. But I think you answered that, but I'm not quite sure. I'm still not quite sure about the events. I don't see how that is in. I don't think you've answered the question.
Effectively, we don't run events. So we could probably just put a line through that altogether and take Bay events off the list. So we could do that quite easily. Like I say, we host events at our venues, but we don't actually run them. So we're not the promoter of anything.
I think it's perception.
Yeah, we can take that out.
Doesn't look good. Yeah. Okay. So I guess we'll be talking with you about your capital program as part of the LTP. I just wonder, because we are going to have a conversation later on and you're here in front of me, I will ask now, is there within that a citywide, other than Memorial Park, a citywide look at something like aquatics provision across the city?
We've certainly developed a venue strategy that we've shared with council to understand how we see the network working. And I think that's one of the challenges that we've had as a city is that we haven't approached our provision of recreation facilities as a network so that they all fit together. We respond and deal with growth moving forward. So that's something that we have certainly put some thoughts through. And I know that's been worked through in terms of the plan where new community centres may open, where new sports courts might open. So that's an ongoing conversation that we're having with council. And those things have been provided for to varying degrees. But obviously there's the challenge of how much funding is available, what happens when, and how quickly some of these things can move forward. So that's an ongoing conversation.
I was just thinking about if we wanted to push the edges of IFF again for community facilities, that you would need to be talking a network if you were going to have a targeted rate across the whole of the city. So you would need to be talking a network. So if we look for funding for Memorial, we would need to have that aquatic network right across the city. So that's good to know that that's there. Is there anything else you want to ask? Did you want to? We're not dealing with the fees, user fees and charges yet.
Christian, it's probably at a later date in terms of, do we do all of this because it's part of the LTP in 1 year, or is there a transition, say, over 2 years, but it might be a discussion later, Chair, because it's probably more to do with terms of Paul's consideration and response to that.
Yeah, just probably a comment on that. I mean, I think there is an issue in the paper around the current year that we're about to enter into, which is extending the loan, but the conversation around the rebalancing on the balance sheet or capitalisation of some debt is from the first year of the LTP. I don't think staggering that in would be a very good idea. I'd much prefer that we set it up cleanly from the start and have the locked in funding arrangements for the long-term plan period to give certainty to the board and the executive around how that works. With regard to the user fees introduction, which I think is a conversation for later on, we have assumed in the paper that the user fees proposals that we've put forward is in with regard to the capital structure. So if that was to, if we were to move that round a bit, we might have to move around some of the operational funding a bit. I guess we're happy to have the conversation around staging the user fees in if we thought that was appropriate, and that's something that the commissioners wanted to consider. But we just have to then think about the impact on the operational funding. Yeah, and so and just to finish off from my perspective, thank you very much to the commissioners for those very positive comments. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank Paul and Anne and your team at TCC that have worked really closely with Chad and the executive team at Bay Venues on this piece of work. So thank you very much for the team, your team as well.
Chair, and it follows on from your comment about that network approach, because and certainly during the life of BVL over the last 10 years, there's probably been another 30 or 40,000 people that have arrived in the city. So I think that wider approach of how we cater for all of that's quite key going forward, and pleased to hear that you are looking at that.
Nothing further? All right, so just to make it clear, the recommendations are that we approve the funding principles. So we're receiving the report with approving the principles, which will be incorporated into, those are the tabled ones today, into the enduring statement of expectations. And then we're approving recommended option 4, which is funding depreciation to cover renewals by another 3.6, I'm going to take my glasses off so I can read, 3.6 million per year, which takes total depreciation up to 7.7, increases in the operating subsidy by 3 million, rebalancing the debt structure, debt retirement from depreciation reserve no longer funding Bay Venues debt retirement from 25 on, etc., etc. But all of that is going into the long-term plan discussions. What is approved to happen is the temporary increase of 5 million on that two-way loan agreement. So subject to us being able to stay within our treasury policy, our treasury limits. So the majority of that goes into the long-term plan discussions, but we approve that temporary increase of the loan of 5 million. So everyone's clear on that? All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Thanks, Paul. Okay, so we have the Mauao team here for the presentation on item 12.5. So I think we've got Dean and Taylor, is that right? Come on up. Joshua. Come on up to the table. And we have your presentation in front of us. Kia ora, welcome.
Ai, kia ora. Kei te mihi kia koutou. Ko Mauao te maunga e tuare nei, ko a winu e rere e whai, e rere ana nei. Ko Tauranga moana ngā tangata ka mihi mai ana kia tātou. I'll just share, Josh and I have just come from Mauao. We had karakia there this morning, 7:30 this morning. We're moving into the next stage of removal of exotic trees. And so we had a health and safety brief with those contractors this morning as well. So yeah, just a little bit on the hop here today. Okay, Mauao, caught by the dawn, or caught by the light. Just in their presentation, I suppose Matariki 2021, 2022. 2021 is when we removed the trig from the top of the maunga and we replaced it with a kapu. And we made a picture of Matariki being the first New Zealand national holiday, marking the Matariki, the rise of that. There was a lot of conversations that went around that. And I suppose we were drawn by how we do our project there through Te Mahere Whakamahinga o Mauao, which is the placemaking interpretation and the kapu and the whakatere, the enhancement of the wayfinding signage and also the installment of turuturu. These are some of the highlights for that year that we've been able to accomplish. I suppose there are simply three objectives for Mauao. The first objective is to enhance the cultural and heritage and the archaeological evidence in the maunga. The second one is around the natural environment and those sorts of things. And so then the third is how people engage with the maunga. And I believe that our team has been doing this over the last year or two. Up on the screen there, we see some of the new signage that is now on Mauao. It helps engage our wider communities and helps to also tell the stories that we have in regards to what's on the maunga, which is objective one. Objective two, which is the enhancement of the maunga for ecological reasons, are those, you can see those signage there, kind of covers those sorts of areas. Next slide, please. Just in regards to the operational activities, restoration planting, more than 13,000 grasses and plants, a removal of 18 large exotic trees, the pampas grass removal, pest control, rabbits, rats and mice. I might let Josh talk about some of that. Walkway maintenance, Ruahine track upgrade or renewal, and the base track, Te Arataki resurfacing. Josh, do you want to talk to any of those points?
Sure, everyone. I will take it as read, but yeah, just some really awesome highlights is believe in New Zealand first at the scale we did with 18 large exotic trees being removed via heavy lift helicopter. Essentially, all of these large exotics were on sensitive archaeology, and as we know, with the nature of exotics, they grow very fast and end up failing fast compared to the natural growth of our natives. That meant we needed to be a bit proactive in our management to remove those trees before they completely failed and destroyed their archaeology. The operation was massively successful. I believe we pulled 280 tonnes off the mountain without touching the mountain. So Heritage New Zealand has been quite open in saying it's the gold standard of exotic removal on archaeological sites. So something me and the team are really proud of. We're sort of a big team of experts, multiple world time champion climbers involved. So yeah, I think it was a really successful operation. And then on the other side, about 12 to 13,000 native trees planted on the maunga. So really net positives there for our ecology in combination with what we're doing with our heritage and really showing our community. So just one final thing I'll touch on other than our track resurfacing. Obviously, we get over 1 million people a year on Mauao, so a lot of upkeep there. So we're always renewing those tracks a lot faster than any other network we have in the city. But our pest animal control, really big proud moment there. We're tracking our rats between operation about 5%, which is really good nationally. But in an operation, we're getting down to 1 to 0%. I'm sure there's the odd rat up there, but we can only work off our data. So our ecology is doing really well. We had our first known translocation of copper skinks last year. So yeah, just really moving forward and some really big proactive steps. So yeah, some proud moments last year. Happy for questions.
One of the other projects that we're doing in partnership with the Mauao Trust is around the myrtle rust. Keeping an eye on that. We're working with Scion as well, so it's a kind of a collaboration in regards to that. And for the Mauao Trust, it's important that a kaitiaki group is to be established from the 3 iwi or the 4 iwi involved, and so the trust is taking lead on that, and we're helping to support them in regards to their achievement. Just on the next page, the renewal section of the Arataki, the Motukodi track maintenance. So this is all part of the maintenance, ongoing maintenance that we're probably going through in this financial year now. And then moving into the future around what we hope to finish in regards to some of the jobs that we have unable to have completed in this current financial round. And just that last page there, on behalf of the trust, sorry, I should have given Mati Moana's apology in the beginning. She isn't able to make it. She was going to come just to do a bit of a spiel from the Mauao Trust, and I suppose on behalf of them, I'd just like to thank the council and staff around how Mauao has been managed and communicated. And you'll see that last page there, 2031 is the Mauao Trust next 10-year plan. And it's titled He Koro Waiariki o Mauao, so the cloaking of Mauao. So as a joint board, we're yet to be privileged to see what that will entail, but I'm sure it will come. So yeah, if any questions between Josh and I'm sure we can manage.
Thanks very much, Dean. And I think, we do want to congratulate you and the Trust on the work that's happening on Mauao. And it's hard to credit that 1 million people traverse those walkways every year. And the couple of times I've been there, the tracks have been in really, really good condition. So, but it's really starting to shape up perfectly. Dean, I understand you celebrated 20 years with TCC recently, so congratulations on that. That's a phenomenal record. And the work that you're doing on Mauao is probably some of the most rewarding work, especially if you're getting down to almost 0 rats. Yeah, no rat running here, Bill. Bill? Any questions? Yep.
Thanks, guys. And I'd certainly just like to acknowledge the great work that's been undertaken, and been walking around yesterday morning trying to skip the rain showers. The number of people who were engaged with the interpretation, the stories, and that all the way around the main track at the bottom. So it was actually quite, and people obviously taking time to understand what in terms of some of those stories and the nature of them. A couple of questions in terms of the exotic tree removal. Is the intent ultimately to have all exotics removed?
Yeah, that was one of the actions in the 2018 management plan. For two reasons: archaeological protection. A lot of those trees were planted directly on archaeological features, but also Mauao is a Class 1 and Class 2 special ecological area. So yeah, as a part of that plan, it is a progressive removal. But some of these larger ones that were failing, they just had a bit of urgency on it. Yeah.
So Josh, what's the time frame? All going well in an ideal world to have that completed?
Well, we're actually hoping to remove another 8 later this week. That will largely mark the end of really sensitive features being in trouble. So there's probably, there's probably about 7 or 8 large ones on the whole mountain left. Some of those strategically do not need to be as active as we have been because they're not on those features, and some do create really good nesting for birds. So it's essentially been 3 years of some quite large amount of removals, and the plan was to now sort of tone down on that as we move to our internal team. Our sort of priorities will change more to our forest we have and restoring that to our upper limit. So I'm quite proud we're almost at that point where I'd feel comfortable in that operational sense that a lot of our features are quite protected and our walkways are protected now. Yeah.
Final question, Chair, was just in terms of those placemaking and interpretation projects, is it intended that suite of work and projects will be completed by the end of next financial year? Just wanted to get a bit of a sense on that.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, that's our target, is to have them done by the end of next year. Yeah.
Tēnā kōrua, thank you for your presentation. I did have a question or just a query, and it's great to see the Mauao Trust strategy document. From memory, I think we had brought forward a lot of the activities that placemaking and the environmental enhancements and the archaeological work. I think we had brought a lot of those activities forward, and great to hear that those things will be completed by midway through next year. I suppose the question that I had is in terms of, so what's next? So it'd be useful to understand when we get the version, the strategic plan finalised by the iwi, we are moving into a long-term plan to understand, what are the other initiatives and other activities that the Trust are interested in, and what role can Council play in delivering on some of those aspirations and outcomes.
Just an answer, and I shouldn't be answering on behalf of the Trust, but my understanding is that the archaeological investigation that we're doing on the seaward side of Mauao, that's to kind of determine if there's any archaeology in there that is what is the archaeology on that side of the moment, with the intention that the plan talks about replanting that area out to benefit the penguin, the bird life on that side, the skink, etc. So I'll certainly pass that on to Mati Moana and the rest of the trustees, Shed, and hopefully they'll get back to you. Cheers.
Just one query, because we've had quite a few people commenting on the removal of the trig station. Now, I understand that used to be used as a surveying a point, but is no longer. Can you explain that? Just so that we get on the public record to people that are concerned that we've removed what was quite an important piece of equipment.
Yes, so very, very correct. The trig station was for a long time a very important measuring point. luckily now in 2023, a lot of those things can be done via GPS and different methods. We worked with LINS to remove the trig, who definitely understood our need for it, the cultural sensitivity of where the trig was actually placed. So in that process, the location was taken digitally, and an offset mark on the summit was also made as well. So if a manual measurement did also ever need to be retaken, it's all that needs to be taken into account as that offset. So the physical purpose of it is still there in essence in the digital format, but also I'd like to say that removing the trig wasn't out of disrespect. It's held in our heritage collection, so it's not like it was thrown away to be disregarded. It's just there was a lot older and more significant history of that location that needed to be
Just to add on to the point that Josh made, it does sit with our heritage collection. It is an interesting object because people carve their names into them, they put stickers on them, and they have built an affinity to the object. So how that might be used in the future is yet to be seen.
Thank you for that. For often these things are done and people don't understand why the whys and then the actions. The fact that, as you say, that the offset is there, the GPS, the marker is there. So we haven't lost anything. We've gained the acknowledgement of the previous history as well. Yeah. Thank you. Bill's moving.
And just on the way through, just acknowledge trust.
Yep. Shared seconding, thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against carried. Thank you very much. Congratulations on 20 years. That's remarkable. And you're still smiling. Okay. Now to something a bit more serious, and that takes us back to item 12.2, rates resolution. Jim's sitting there, all ready to go. Catherine somewhere, I suppose. Right, just you today, Jim. Oh, well, I'm sure you're capable of handling it.
I'll just introduce, if that's okay. So rates resolution, we adopted the annual plan in May, which is earlier than normal. This is the rates resolution that reflects the annual plan document for next financial year, and includes all of the information and numbers that have coming through from that adoption of annual plan.
Any questions? Yep, Bill.
Just a clarification, Jim, on page 81, there's a heading community rate and a targeted rate for community amenity investment. A bit of clarification on that, because I note on the previous page, which I understand we've got the lakes targeted rate, but it was just the community amenity investment and what that was for.
So the community targeted rate was introduced, I think, about 3 years ago, and it was really to let the community know that there was additional investment above what we had been invested previously, in order to try and bring up the community amenity stock for the city. So this was instead of having it in the general rate, it was moved into a targeted rate so that the public can see the continued investment for that activity.
Just to follow on, how much do we realise through that? And if you don't know, if you can let us know, it'd be fine.
I have to get back to you on that, Bill. I don't know the exact number.
Thanks, Jim. I've just got a quick question. at para 6, we talk about the medium rates increase to 7.2, an increase of 0.5 from what we had planned through the LTP. At para 7 talks about the commercial rates being 18%. Was that 0.5 as well, or?
Yeah, we didn't put an offset on the commercial rate because the amount of water that's used by the commercial sector varies quite widely from a small shop that would use much the same as a residential to a large industrial outfit which might use quite a lot of water. So we didn't feel that offsetting it and there would actually make much sense for the commercial sector.
Okay.
That does reflect the second year of the changes to the commercial rates.
Yes, that's the second year, the differential which was phased in to give the commercial sector some time to budget for that. And also, so for the larger water users, they will get quite a bit of advantage of the water rate only increasing by a smaller amount this year. So it just doesn't say it in that sentence.
Right. Someone like to move the resolution, Stephen? And Bill,
happy to move, Chair, and just make the comment. I mean, the rates increase is consistent with our intentions to set out in the long-term plan. But I think it's important to note that this is actually losing us ground in terms of our inflation rates running well above the 7% rate, particularly on infrastructure. And so whilst there is pressure, and the council does recognise that there is pressure right across the community in terms of cost of living, and hopefully this decision on the rates today will be seen by the community as council's acknowledgement that we have to manage costs, and they increased rates are impacting the community. However, we're about to go into a conversation later on today about how we make sure we plan for the capital investment and the service delivery across the whole city in the longer term. And we can't continue to keep these rates increases low in the face of inflation rates that are in the range of 14 to 20% on some of our infrastructure projects. So really just wanted to make that observation. I think it was appropriate this year, but I think we have to acknowledge that we can't continue to run a rates increase less than the rate of inflation that we're facing. Otherwise, we'll end up paying or being in exactly the same situation as VVL have just been in, of not funding the necessary investment, and we end up paying in so many different ways across the community. So happy to move the recommendations as they stand on that basis.
Bill seconded. Yes, I was going to make exactly the same point, that the reality is that that's probably less than inflation. And whilst it is timely, given what's going to be a very difficult year for everyone, we are going backwards. And you just have to look at that BVL and the legacy of underinvestment that you not only pay in the short term, but you also build that bow wave ahead of you that then means it's a considerable chunk to try and catch up, just to catch up. However, it was the right thing to do in this year. And it does make it tougher for the ongoing years, but it is the right thing to do. And even our commercial sector, with that second year of the differential change, for a lot of businesses, that's going to be really tough. So I do think we need to acknowledge that. Any other comments? No? I'll put that motion then. That's quite complicated. So we're receiving the report, and then we have to individually note each of the different rates and parts of the rating. The one thing I'd say about it is very transparent what you're actually paying for. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thanks, Jim.
just say about the community targeted rate collected 8.6 million from 290 million. So that's how much the additional community investment was, 8.6.
They adopted the community facilities investment strategy. It was?
I'm sure it was the first 2131 LTP. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, development contributions policy 12.3. Scott. Ben, it's Ben. Yeah, I'm looking at Scott and I'm looking up and it's not.
Tried to get him to come and present this, but no luck. Good morning. We're bringing the DC policy for 23-24. That's for implementation on 1 July alongside the rates that you just heard about and the new annual plan. We bring a new DC policy effectively every year. The key difference with this policy from previous ones is that we haven't consulted publicly on the changes. We normally do. The reason we haven't this year is it became apparent towards the end of last year that we wouldn't be introducing any major new capital projects, which tend to be the key drivers of cost change. And instead, costs would be driven by, to your earlier comments, the rising inflation rate and also the holding costs associated with debt. That sort of impacts our long-term holding cost assumptions. Sorry, I can move that. There we go. So those are the key drivers. You would have seen we called out a couple of catchments that have seen larger changes. Bar West, which is effectively the lakes, where there have been some reserve and transport costs, creating a little more change, and a decrease in Papamoa, where we've finished collecting for a couple of neighbourhood reserves that are now fully funded. By not consulting this year, it does save us a bit of time, which we've been able to reallocate to our next DC policy, 24-25, where we're proposing some chunkier changes, which will be consulted on. Take any questions?
Thanks, Ben. You didn't consult publicly, but I did actually have the master builders come in to me in my this month's clinic. And Shad and I met and talked with the local president and also the local rep on the national body. They are obviously very concerned. There's a huge downturn in building and construction. We'll see later on in the exec report that the numbers are going through the roof. And in fact, I think quite recently we had a discussion with one of our large companies locally who were looking at maybe 1 or 2 houses this year where normally they would be 8 or 9 signing up. It seemed to me, and I've had this discussion before, it seems to me that there is a lack of understanding, despite the fact that having read the policy in the attachment, particularly the exec report, I didn't go through all the detail, I can't attest to that, but there is actually a very clear explanation of the difference between local development costs, contributions charged at the time of subdivision versus citywide development contributions charged at the time of the building consent. Because the master builders were saying that part of the cost increases going on to building new homes is our development contributions, and they were talking as if they were all one lump, and talking about could they be better paid at the time of subdivision rather than the building consent, etc. So it seemed that there was a misunderstanding from them about that. I just wonder, I know we have a developers group that we meet with regularly. I'm hoping that we have a similar regular meetings with our construction companies, house building people, so that we can talk through some of these issues. The other thing they raised was the H1 policy, which they indicated was adding between $40,000 and $70,000 to every house. every new house. And again, you mentioned that's mentioned in the development policy, which is, it just seems that every time we turn around, the costs are going up on building a house in the poor old house builder. But can you come back to my first question, which is really, what is the relationship that we have with builders, particularly the master builders, and is that frequent enough, and is there enough understanding of the structure of our development contributions? And I guess I'm asking, have we got that right?
Right. So yes, there is an existing relationship, although that's primarily run through Steve Pearce on the regulatory side. I can't remember the exact name of the group he attends. Somebody else might be able to. But it is, I believe it's sort of monthly or 6 weekly, and Master Builders, I believe, attends that. We can confirm that. The conversation about timing happens sort of semi-regularly. Last time it came up was about 3 years ago, just before you joined us. For perhaps obvious reasons, it didn't quite make it to the top of the agenda at that time. We prepared a bunch of material on that, sort of talking about the different timing that DCs could be charged at. There are different options, different councils do it differently. There are pros and cons to each, so we'll bring a memo back up to you so you can kind of see what the options could be. I think there is a decent level of understanding from those more sophisticated players in both the construction and land development sectors. It's been relatively stable for a number of decades now, so they are pretty well across it. It's just, different priorities about who pays and when, and as I said, there are pros and cons to each option.
I think that would be helpful to us to have a look at that, because even the comments that Steve sent through ahead of the clinic showed a bit of sympathy for some of the points that they were raising. And if the local president had been able to come this morning, I think he probably would have made those points. So it doesn't take away from what we're doing, because we're not making any major changes to development contributions this year, but I think it would help if we had that conversation. Chad.
Thank you. I had a quick flick through the policy as well. One thing that kind of stood out to me in the policy was the population projections. I assume in the next LTP we'll go through a revision of that. I suppose if we've kind of got a history of underestimating the rate of growth across the city, which would then impact in terms of what we charge for development contributions. So my question is, I assume there would be a review of those population projections, and I know it's kind of all based off agreed assumptions driven through smart growth, but there are implications, I think, when it comes to how we calculate our DCs.
Correct, yeah. Under legislation, we're obliged to reflect the LTP growth assumptions, so ours will mirror those exactly. We're starting a little bit of thinking for the next DC policy, just to look at how, hindsight's obviously useful. Looking back, say our transport numbers, the sort of growth we've experienced, and how much of our transport capex has actually been funded by that growth. It does seem like there's probably a little bit of an imbalance there. So we've sort of, transport is our primary focus, obviously, when the water space is changing, to kind of understand, are we charging enough? It can be a little bit hard when you build it up project by project. Maybe you get lost in the weeds a bit and you haven't had that top-down approach to say, is there enough coming through? But yeah, so that'll be part of the thinking for the 24-25 policy.
Thanks, Chair. Just on that same theme and following on from Shad's question, I delved into the attachment and I'm looking at, I'm on page 104, which highlights the memorial aquatic facilities. And what sort of struck me there was that it talks about the funding calculation and then basing it on the population at the start of the year of 150,000 people. Now, I think the population of the city is probably over 160 at the moment. So the concern I have is how flexible, because things change over a period of time, in terms of that assessment. Because if it was based on that, and I might have the wrong end of the stick, but that's on the population now also, but we'll also be creating a facility for future people. So I just wanted to get a bit more of an understanding of that particular process. And is that something for the next major review?
I'll respond to that one. So yes, you've got a statutory requirement to align your DC policy with your long-term plan document. And I don't think we updated the DC policy when we did the LTPA, which is where you made those investments. We do it on the 3-yearly cycle. So that those underlying assumptions and the timing of the investment and the population projections and what you're building the facilities for will be picked up in the next LTP round, the one we're just starting now, and flow through into that. Am I getting a nod from down there? I'm getting a nod, so I'm on track. So if you have a misalignment between their adopted LTP and what's in your DC policy, there are legality issues in the charging. So that's why we tend to do it every 3 years and get that reconciliation. So we'll pick that up as part of the upcoming round.
Just so, together with cost increases, if our assessments below what potentially they could be, the gaps just gets bigger and bigger over a period of time. So no, thanks for that, Christine. The other question I had relates to it's not a simple process by the look of it, changing the development contribution charges on an annual basis. So we use the multiplied by the increase in the producer's price index. I don't pretend to understand all of that. But what I was concerned about is in terms of that review process, how far does it actually take into account all of those changes in cost that we are facing? Because again, given what's happened in finance in more recent times in the last 12 or 18 months, any review and increase in charges still may not be addressing that increase in what it costs to deliver these projects. So that was my concern.
Again, it comes back to a similar point. With our DC policy, we have to reflect the annual plan or the long-term plan. And so while all of those projects should have been re-looked at by the project managers as part of those processes, and our numbers flow through as well, we also sort of have a line-by-line sense check process where we go away and say, does this actually make sense? Like if projects are starting to be turned on for collection or turned off for collection, have we actually collected enough? So there is sort of a human eye running over these to sense check it as well.
Kind of building on the theme, really, and I guess at the core of our questioning is whether or not our DC policy is keeping pace with reality, and both in terms of population growth, but also inflation. The DC policy, I mean, there's changes apart from perhaps the lakes are relatively minor. But our DC policy was based on an assumption around inflation, which was at the time much lower. Does anyone remember what the inflation rate was?
Sorry, at what time?
So that the inflation rate that was built into the existing DC policy.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Was an assumption of around 3%.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Whereas we know the PPI is telling us that the inflation's actually been close to 10%. So if you have the combination of both underestimating numbers and based on a low inflation assumption, what I can't understand is why we are not higher and closer to that PPI with the proposed changes that are coming through. We could have, for example, increased them significantly more, but we've chosen.
I think the key thing is that many of the projects in the DC policy have already been delivered, paid for, completed. So there's no escalation driver on those from inflation. Where it does kick in perhaps is where we're still carrying debt for those projects, and so the debt assumption has to lift. Again, our debt assumptions reflect those in the annual plan or long-term plan, which have, I understand, been moderated for the current environment, and those are reflected in here. But when you're looking across an entire catchment, maybe with 30 projects and 27 of them have been delivered and paid for, obviously they're not being driven by inflation anymore. It's just the residual 3. And so as a proportion of the total package, the change looks quite small. On an individual project level, many of them have changed as much as or greater than the PPI for construction outputs.
I think so. It's the mix of projects and what's
it's sort of a weighted average, yeah.
All of this underlines the policy that the council has, which is clearly stated here, is that the costs of growth, whether it's new infrastructure or upgrading existing infrastructure, and by infrastructure I'm talking all infrastructure, whether it's community facilities, pipes, roads, whatever, parks, is paid for by growth. And that was really the underlying that's really the underlying problem that the master builders had, was that there is a benefit, and people do argue that there is a benefit to the wider community from growth. Actually, when the commissioners came here, we didn't actually find very many people that believed in that and felt that they were paying for growth as existing ratepayers. So the policy of making sure that everyone pays their fair share means that growth has to pay for growth, and you've clearly outlined there's a legislative process that has to go through, and that's reflected in this complicated big thing that the average person can't understand. And probably hasn't got the time to completely read and understand. But that philosophy is one that I don't think a rapidly growing city like Tauranga would ever want to change. And if you do start pulling away at it, you end up then with a huge burden, growing burden on the existing residents. And the new growth feeding off that and benefiting from unfairly, I think, from that, the cost to existing residents and in their quality of life changes. So certainly, in adopting these today, we are continuing with that policy, and I think it's important to make that very clear. Growth pays for growth. Bill?
I don't think we've quite reached that yet in terms of growth paying for growth in its entirety, because we've had matters over the last year or 18 months where general rates has had to pay for some matters. So I just wanted to make that point, that's clear. We're still going down that line, but we have a wee way to go. And I note that the financing costs aren't included in the review of the increases that are outlined on 86. So I think it's we just keep on that path and refine and fine tune as we go along on that basis.
Sorry, I've just got another. I was just sitting here thinking after Bill was talking. From a policy perspective, I don't know if you can answer this, but in terms of our approach, the effectiveness of our policy, how do we compare against others, against other metros?
I provide some introductory comments. So we're probably one of the most comprehensive development contributions policy, and there were some changes to the Local Government Act a couple of years back, and those changes were modelled on the TCC policy. So a lot of other councils have now applied. A lot of the other councils were far more generic, where we was very specific in terms of the projects that were the costs related to and that were covered, and we're very explicit around the fundamental principles and things like that that drove it. So that approach has very much been adopted and applied elsewhere. There is a group of growth councils that have and work with DCs, and there's a national group which we've got quite a high level of involvement. So maybe Ben can sort of talk about that. So we are quite well connected what others who've got reasonable growth are doing.
Yeah, I think that's correct. The DC system is sort of good, but inherently flawed. We can never, it's virtually impossible under the current legislation to collect 100% of costs, really, just because it's forwards looking. And so you're always falling short, and everybody has that same problem. In terms of our effectiveness compared to other councils, I don't know off the top of my head. I think the advantage we have is that we do update annually, which means as costs change and we have so many projects that are funded through growth. It means we're more up to the minute than many other councils who might, you have to update every 3 years, and many do just do that.
Okay, so someone prepared to move? Shared and Bill. So we received the report, adopt the 2023 policy and delegate any minor errors or omissions to General Manager of Strategy, Growth and Governance. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. 12.6 Puerto Rifi. Have I missed one? I missed it. Oh yes, because I skipped over I was on Mauao. Sorry, user fees and charges. Yes. No. I was on persuaded by Mauao. Hi.
Kia ora, Catherine Hooker from Strategy, Growth and Governance, one of the corporate planners.
If I just introduce this paper, so this is the adoption of the user fees coming about. So we went through a submissions process for this, despite we didn't consult on the annual plan. We did for user fees, given a number of them were statutorily required to consult on, and we did the whole lot. 139 submissions back. The bulk of them, it's fair to say, related around bay venues. And then the paper outlines in paragraph 19 a number of suggested changes as part of those submissions. So I'll hand back to Catherine if she wants to add anything more or take questions.
Not really. So, yep, absolutely. Bay venues had the majority of the responses. They did submissions. They did come back with some responses and are here as well to answer any questions. Yeah, so most of those submissions were around cost, and there was a couple that did mention around the fairness of the indoor versus outdoor sport cost with that. Yeah, that's probably pretty much it. A couple of other groups did respond with some changes, just some really small changes in there. And water supply also did have a change there around reducing the fixed water cost down to zero, which was in response to the annual report 23-24. Any questions?
Hey, do you want to get Chad up to the table with you? Because I think there might be a few questions that to be asked of BVL. And Tina? I understand Tina had all the answers, Chad.
Yeah, I think it's worth just noting, and hello again, that we were aware that there were the conversations going on at a council level. We apologise that we didn't have someone here to maybe help with that process. We have been very closely involved in terms of the conversations with community groups. We had, for example, 3 user group forums last week where we heard from our community centres and halls users, our aquatic users, and indoor sports facilities users. So there has been an ongoing conversation with the community. And we have been listening very closely to that. Obviously, we are well aware of the impact of the increase of charges on our user groups. Equally, as you are aware from the paper earlier today, that we've had significant cost increases that we need to manage. So I know there were some questions and challenges around that, and Tina was just going to maybe give a quick run through of the process that we went through and where we've got to, and maybe responding to some of the queries that have come up. So hopefully that will head off some of those questions.
My apologies, kia ora koutou. To begin with, I just want to outline that the prices, most of them that we had inherited, were starting from a low place, and annually we've adjusted them by CPI in the main. We did a benchmark back in 2019, and we did that because we knew that our prices were well below the national benchmark. We presented those to the user groups. However, COVID came along, so it was not the right time to do that. However, we did have some users that adjusted their model in response, knowing that this was going to come. So in December 2022, we did that national benchmark again. We measured against metropolitan cities, and it was an independent review that was done. We matched ourselves against metropolitan cities, and in some cases, the population was higher, and in some cases, the population was lower. So this wasn't about cherry picking which venues to benchmark against. We wanted to be impartial with the outcome. So that you're aware, we have tiered and differential pricing, and this has been outlined to users as well as. So we start off at the highest point, and I'll use sports facilities as an example. You have an adult standard rate. That is still subsidised by ratepayers, but that's the starting point. From there, we then make an adjustment for regular community users. So that's a 15% discount. We then do another adjustment for youth and seniors. So that's a 30% discount. Trustpower Arena is from the sports facilities, the one that costs the most because of the level of service that's provided. But then we adjust it for Queen Elizabeth Youth Centre. So that's 80% of the arena. And then we adjust for the Mount Sports Centre, the Aquinas and Maryvale. So right the way through, there's considered tier pricing and differential rating. The same exercise applies to community centres and halls, recognising that what you get at Arataki is not what you get, say, for example, at the Elizabeth Street. And then when we turn our heads to the aquatic facilities, general entry, we have a price for adult, a price for seniors, a price for youth, and a family gets a 20% discount on those prices. We recognise that it's a price shock, and when you look at the percentages, they seem high, and they are from a percentage perspective. However, if you then look closer at a per person per hour for groups, and for sports users, for example, we've gone with 16 people, 2 teams of 8. For regulars, the price difference is between 64 and 96 cents per person. For community centres and halls, 20 people. Once again, community regular, the price is between 20 cents and 86 cents, and so forth with aquatics. We've had a look at the submissions that were provided, and where we got the most feedback was around aquatics, and particularly lane hire. So lane hire, the benchmark that we put in was $13. Now that is actually lower than what the report presented to us, but we recognise the price shock that would occur. What we've done is we've gone back and had a look at that, and we've decided to move the proposal to have a 10% discount for regulars. Now, the other bit is there's been talk about double dipping. It is standard practice to have a lane hire and a general entry fee. The general entry fee we charge for squad users is exceptionally lower than the general fee. You put the two together, lane hire, squads based on four people per lane, and it is between 70 cents and 80 cents per person per hour is the increase. The other feedback is about notification. So we actually notified users back in February 22 that this was coming. And in those communications, early communications, we put links to the TCC website so that they could have visibility as what was being presented to the commissioners. Once we got through that, we then set about actually giving them more detailed information so they could see not only the percentage, but also the effect from a per person perspective. We've had 4 sets of communication and face-to-face meetings with people, including some of those that made submissions. We then got asked to put in Pettigrew Arena, which is in the Hawke's Bay. So we did that as well as put the numbers through, provide them back to our users, and still what we are proposing is less than national benchmark. There's also talk about drowning statistics and how can you put prices up when in aquatics when you've got drowning stats the way they are. There's been 46 deaths since 1st of January 2023 in New Zealand. 25 years and over make up the bulk of those drownings, and it's 78%. And of that, 24% have been in the 55 plus age range. What we do in that space is water safety lessons, and year to date we've provided 19 schools or 2,344 tamariki, 8 to 10 lessons of water safety, and it's a space that we continue to work in and will do so, and if we could, we'd do more. So it's important that we arm our tamariki with water safety lessons. That's it from me.
Comprehensive, thank you, Tina. But I think for me, what it emphasises is this is a crazy process that we've got in place. And so by combining all the user fees and charges in one process that we consult on, and then have hearings with whether it's 4 commissioners or we have 10 a mayor and 9 councillors sitting around the table. We need to be actually either doing this together or doing this separately. And I'm going to add into the recommendations that we design a future process to hear submissions together, or just design a new process to hear submissions on user fees and charges when Bay Venues user fees and charges are included, so that together, because we don't want this to happen again, either for the council that's going to be hearing it, for Bay Venue sitting in the background listening to it and having good data to back it up, and the people themselves who are talking to us but actually really should be talking to you. But thank you very much for the background information. I think that's very helpful, and I think you did try and elicit from some of the submitters what the actual changes per person were going to make. I mean, people love talking statistics, but if you're coming from a low base, it often skews the conversation. So that's my comments, and I'm happy to have that. I'll give the wording in that and include it in the recommendation.
Well, starting off with a comment, Chair, and I think and you've highlighted, Tina, in terms of the dangers of percentages, in terms of what the actual movement is in reality. So no, and thank you for presenting, because we felt important for that wider, how you went about the review to have that wider public context and opportunity. Just one, and you've explained the aquatics. In terms of the Mount Sports Centre, what do the proposed changes mean for and we had a group came along and presented on that. I'd just be interested in what the change would be, not the percentage, but what the actual dollar or cent amount would be. Just be helpful for some context.
Sure. So I've got my prices here. So Mount Sports Centre is considered to be the tier 3 of the sports facilities. When we talk about our community regulars, if we base this on 16 people per hour, the change is for an adult community regular, 77 cents per person, per hour, per court. And for youth senior community regulars, it's 81 cents. Now, it is higher because of that starting point, ensuring that we've got that differential prices right across the whole network. I'd also just like to remind that those prices aren't going up until January 2024. Great. Yes. And the reason why we've done that, general entry prices will go up in July. However, we've delayed it for court hire, lane hire, room hire, because we recognise that a lot of those groups will set their membership fees at the beginning of the year. So we want to give them time to be able to embed those and also apply for funding.
Thanks, Tina. Great explanation on all that detail. Just on para 19, I don't know if it's for you guys or probably is, but talks about the estimate $35,000 revenue impact. So when you guys came in the first time and we sent you away to do some more work, and you came back and said, you know, there's probably about $1 million worth of revenue you could collect. So I assumed it's 35,000 is a reduction in what you had originally indicated to us.
Yeah, I think we had 1.1 million was, I think we started at 1 million and then we pushed that a little bit harder at your request to get to 1.1. So this 35,000 would come off that, but I think we can probably manage that within our existing budget.
So I've moved this, sorry, with the addition of an I, which is, do you want it up? Yeah, can you put it up? Not that you'd necessarily argue with people when they come and make submissions, but it is helpful in the preparation of the report and then the discussions afterwards. Yeah, design. So it would be. It should be. Yeah. So where you put it into the middle there. It needs to be an I. Yeah. No, not I design.
You need
it needs to be I at the S after H. I after H.
Chair, I presume, or option 2.
Yes. So she'll get the positioning right, but you get the idea. Someone prepared to second that?
Yeah,
Bill?
on the basis in terms of straight back explanation and it comes back to that.
If we delay this, we're just pushing it out. We're just pushing that bow wave out and making it a higher subsidy that we're going to have to put in. The other thing, I do understand, Barbara, that we are having, so the points that the submitters made about the difference in charges between indoor and outdoor, the staff are already having a look at that for us.
Yes, certainly you're correct. We're going through a comprehensive review of all of our fees and charges, and that will feed into the LTP.
Thank you for asking that, because I was just going to ask the very same question, because that to me was an important element of the consultation process, is really identifying that difference. And I think we have to satisfy ourselves that, you know, we are doing a fair assessment of charges right across the whole recreational sector. I note that my colleagues are quite happy to delete option 2. I, for one, would actually have been quite happy to proceed with the prices as they were proposed, because, I mean, I think this fundamentally comes down to making sure that everyone pays their fair share. We've delayed hard decisions in the past, and we know that it bites us in a catch-up, which is exactly what we're facing now, and why the percentage increases are what they are. But when you come down to, as Tina, you have so correctly set out, the increases on an individual basis per hour, in the cents, not in the dollars, and those are very modest increases in a real financial sense. So I think there's a strong case for having run with them, but I'll concede to the majority, which clearly sees the reduction in the water charges. But note that is a $35,000 revenue impact, which is not insignificant in its own right. And it just shows you that, we're basically trading either ratepayers are going to have to pay this cost or users are going to have to pay this cost in the end, even though you may be able to absorb the 35,000 this year from an operational perspective. So I'm happy with the recommendations. I'm happy that we do have a review of the wider sports charging basis. I do have a query, and I know that this was a decision that we've already taken, so it's not appropriate to change it. But why did we decide to keep the water charges, or to basically remove the fixed meter charge, given all of our costs, etc., continually rising?
So with the water charge, in previous years we did have significant increases in that. That meant that in the current financial year, with changes in volume, with that continued increase, we would actually recover a lot more than the cost of that activity. And we looked to try and keep the volumetric at a higher level, which meant that the other number to change was a reflection in that fixed charge. So rather than keep the fixed charge in and therefore bring the volumetric charge down, we kept the volumetric at a higher and brought that fixed charge down. We recognise that it's a temporary move. The charge is still in place. It's just set at 0 for this year, which gives that flexibility to put it back based on what the cost of that activity effectively is doing. So that was the reason why. It was also a reflection that as part of that overall rate increase, it did reduce that number for this year, because to the previous report on the rating resolution, the rate excluding water charge is in the 9s, it comes down to the 7s with the water charge changes.
Okay, but it just kind of reinforces the same issue once again. We're going to go into a long-term plan conversation this afternoon. What it will clearly show is the cost of providing water infrastructure is rising at a rapid rate. And if we don't collect the charges to cover that, then we're going to be in a hole. Pleasingly, at least in this situation, the revenue will be charged against those that are higher users, given it the volumetric component. So I think that's a positive outcome. But I think we should always be asking the question, do we have the right charges in place to make sure we're investing properly for the future? And that was really the basis of my question, and why I support a higher increase sooner rather than later. But nevertheless, notwithstanding that, thank you for your questions, and I'm happy to support the motion.
In a recession, though, things are slightly different. And with the water, I think we've got it the right way round and keeping those volumetric up. I mean, we are also at the same time talking to people about conserving water, thinking about how they use water. So philosophically, the volumetric would have been the wrong one to charge, to reduce. But you're right. But we are in a recession, and we have had significant movement in the rates, and probably going to continue for the next 10 years. So this is going to be a tough year for everyone, and I think we're reflecting that. Okay, everybody done? I'll put the motion with the removal of option 2 and the inclusion of I on the future process so that we hear those submissions together. I think that makes sense. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much, Chad and Tina, for coming along. Nice to see a different Catherine in the finance seat. What's our timing? Right, okay, yes, I think we will take a 15-minute break for a cup of tea, cup of coffee, and so that means we will be back at 11 o'clock. Actually, it's a bit longer than 15 minutes. 11 o'clock return. Meeting's adjourned. Okay, meeting is resumed. Is the sound on? All right, the meeting is resumed, and that brings us to item 12.6, Puerto Rifi. Who's going to talk to this? Christine.
Yep. So this report's following through on a previous discussion around consultation on the use of the land Puerto Rifi, previously known as Mauao Farms. There have been previous resolutions, the most recent one where the council required staff to come back with a decision on whether the land should be disposed of for housing after feedback from mana whenua. So that discussion has been going. There have been a number of hui held with Ngāti Kahu over the last few months. So the report summarises the material that was in the previous report and should be considered in conjunction with that when the consultation feedback came back. So that's 8th of February 2022. We've summarised and just repeated for your information the key points made through the submission process. So we've worked with Ngāti Kahu, listened to their views, and a revised, updated concept plan has been prepared. It responds to the issues raised by Ngāti Kahu, but also a number of the issues raised through the submission process, proposes more of a mixed-use development, so the housing scale has reduced from 22 hectares in what was originally consulted to this proposed updated plan of 11.4 hectares for housing. It has 3 sports fields on it. It proposes retaining an area for cultural recognition, the historic area, a green belt along the upper escarpment for natural and ecological, and then the lower areas recognising also cultural and ecological values. So it's there is still further work, and you'll note that in the plan, but it's a broad concept plan that we're proposing. And the report provides more detail about each of those spaces and how it would be utilised. So this report is an opportunity to close out the consultation process. I'd just like to point out that there are a number of matters discussed in the legal implications section. The significance policy refers to a disposal of a significant asset. We've looked at that policy, and our view is that it applies to a network of assets rather than individual assets. And we also note that only part of the land is transferring out of active reserves and parks. We're still retaining active and sports use in there as well. And we also have other opportunities to deliver on the desired outcomes. So in our view, it doesn't meet that test, and therefore consultation through the LTP is not required. Happy to answer any questions.
Eating Shad's daughter's cookies. Yes, so look, thank you for that. I think where we are is still at the concept level, and it's important to make that point. But we've probably met a lot of the concerns of the original submitters by accentuating particularly the green space is almost not quite a green necklace, but it's considerable amount. And the discussions with Ngāti Kahu have been fruitful and constructive. So I'm sure that that will continue as we get down into a bit more detail. Shad, I think you wanted to move the resolutions with a slight amendment.
Yes, I do have a couple of comments, and then I've got an amendment to one of the resolutions. Yeah, I think when we first started on this process, seems like quite a long time ago now, consulting with the community, trying to get a good understanding around their appetite for housing, and it's pretty clear that a large section of our community would like to still keep it green, and then there was some that wanted housing. So I think where we've landed, and in particular with our discussions with Ngāti Kahu, kind of brings that balance. And picking up on your point, Chair, when you look at the proposal that we went out with, I think we had 66% of the land was actually set aside for housing, and 34% was set aside for passive green space, where we've actually kind of flipped that actually 66% of the land now will be green, sports fields, the historic site, the environmental areas and connections down to the river, and about 34% of the land will be designated for housing. I do make the point that we have been working positively with Ngāti Kahu, taking into account their aspirations to protect that past site. It is quite significant, not just for them, but for the iwi and hapu of Tauranga Moana, but also from a national perspective. It connects into what happened at Pukehinahina and at Tauranga, where the rules of engagement were drafted by our ancestors in preparation for that conflict. So it is quite an important site to protect and preserve, which was one of the key things that came through from Ngāti Kahu, and I think Council's always been aware of that. Also, the opportunities for environmental enhancements and the connections back to the river. We've taken those things into account, but also some of the other green elements, and recognising the connection of Ngāti Kahu in particular to this area, but also the housing element. We know the hapu have lands on the other side of the state highway, and have always sought to develop papakainga for their own people. And so there are opportunities for us to engage with them about how we can best use Puerto Rifi to enhance their development aspirations as well. So I do want to take the point. I mean, we are wanting to work closely with them to realise their long-term aspirations. There's still a long way to go. I mean, this is just the first part of changing those original decisions that this land will be set aside for sports fields. So we do need to, which comes through in the recommendations, but we still need to step through a plan change process and work through that as well, along with the community and the hapu. Just in terms of the resolution in recommendation C, we have said endorses in principle the updated concept plan for Puerto Rifi that reflects this proposed land use, and notes the concept plan will be further developed and reported back to council for approval. I do want to include in there that process should be done in consultation with Ngāti Kahu representatives. But we can add that in, because it
Add in after developed in consultation with Ngāti Kahu.
Yep. Because that will link
and
into
report back to council for approval.
Yeah. Yes, and then that'll link into recommendation F as well. And then my query is in relation to this, and I can't recall when we went through the submission process. I assume that we'd need to go back to all of the submitters with the decision made, and I can't even recall whether this is the deliberation or whether we actually had deliberations.
This is effectively it. So you did consider some of the matters and you felt you didn't have sufficient information, particularly around the Ngāti Kahu view, and so you asked us to go further. So it's a bit of a hybrid, it's both, which is why the report particularly refers to it, but also in particular Resolution A notes that previous report as well, because it does form part of, so this is effectively the final deliberations and decision making.
So with that, I'm happy to move, subject to other questions and comments.
Bill, you're happy to second? Yep.
I just had a sorry. The thinking, Christine, then around the subsequent process in terms of concept plan and then structure plan and plan change around potential time, really indicative timing, because there's a bit of process to go yet.
I've had a conversation with Janine and the planning team, and there's a resolution about starting the plan change process. So we will immediately get the technical work underway. So there's quite a lot of technical work done that's required for a plan change. So that's really regardless of how that concept plan gets finalised. There's a lot of work that can happen irrespective. The natural hazards assessment, all of those sorts of things. So that will get commenced straight away, and then we will run the concept planning in parallel, and the structure planning, we can start with some of the structure planning because some of the services and things like that probably wouldn't change a heap. So we'd start working on that, and I think we're into sort of refinement, not major total change of the concept plan. So I'm envisaging that all run in parallel, but there will definitely need to be reviews. And the concept plan is really dependent on Ngāti Kahu's timing and getting those two representatives, and then we can move at a reasonable pace. So I think once we've had their nominated reps and we can agree with them a timetable, we can bring that back to you. And it's really the key.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair, and I'm really happy to support the recommendations. I do recall the meeting that we had with Te Kahu at the time of discussing this particular project, and the conclusion of that meeting, I said at the time that I thought this was an opportunity to do something pretty special in this location, and I think what we've come up with at a concept level, and we've still got more work to do, but at a concept level, as Shad says, the right balance. It's a balance between our history and the cultural story that surrounds that. It's a balance on environmental, but it's also a balance in terms of delivering our statutory responsibility to deliver housing. What I hope is that when we get to the detail, that we have a development that does become a bit of an exemplar of urban design. That doesn't mean to say it has to be the flashiest development in town, because we're actually wanting to deliver some affordable social housing as part of this. But I think there's an opportunity for us to demonstrate how you can both deliver affordable social housing and good urban design and bring those two things together. And so we've got an opportunity here that balances all of those imperatives. And I'd love to see Puerto Rifi being an exemplar of good urban design, delivering social and affordable housing, but also the recreational, leisure and passive recreational space that creates a real little community of its own. And I think that's the aspiration of Ngāti Kahu, and I think that's something we agree and support. So here's an opportunity to do something special, and I'm really happy to support the recommendations.
Following on from Stephen's point about urban design, it's probably another good opportunity in terms of engagement at whatever the right time was in terms of the urban design panel, in terms of picking up a number of those matters.
Okay, nothing further? So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. 12.7, Arataki Community Liaison Group, and Kaylee's coming up to speak to it. Thanks, Kaylee.
Kia ora koutou. You will all have read the report, so I won't go into a huge amount of details on the feedback and the learnings, but I do want to highlight from my perspective just two of the key learnings, especially when we're looking at this kind of community participation panel in the future. I think there's a couple of things that's been really quite profound and useful when we're thinking about setting up these groups in the future. But just before that, I'd like to say a huge thank you to the members who invested many, many hours and a huge significant amount of their energy and good faith to partner with the council. They were really invested to try and make the Arataki area better. So yeah, just want to thank them for that commitment. I think the biggest thing that really struck me through this process, and also looking at the LinksAV panel, was we kind of tried to have a really broad remit with the Arataki group, but what we didn't have was that specific singular focus, which meant that we almost were trying to bite off more than we could chew. With the LinksAV panel, by contrast, which still has challenges, and I guess on the other side, some really strict non-negotiables, but there was a singular point of focus with the Arataki group. It was just very broad. And often it would then lead to times where I guess the group's expectations of what they could influence were misaligned to what council could deliver, especially in that safety and infrastructure area. That also happening at a time where all of a sudden decisions were being made quickly, and we were really moving into a delivery kind of, I guess, phase of council's life, meant that I guess that engagement wasn't carried out in the way that all partners really hoped for in the beginning. The second key learning I'd say would be around just the consistency of, and the importance of having the consistency of staff throughout the project. We had changes within my team at that time where, for efficiency reasons, we were combining communications and engagement. That kind of lack of having a facilitator there for a couple of months really did impact on the momentum. And once that is lost, it was really hard to regain. Also looking at just the time commitment to do these kind of groups justice, really, I would say, is close to kind of a full-time member of staff looking after them to make sure that we're kind of, partnering in the best possible way. Any questions?
Thanks, Kaylee. I did want to pick up on your thanks and include that in the recommendations, that we thank all those involved. And I remember, even from the staff point of view, and we had Josh on staff who were also equally invested, Joel, who were equally invested in making it work. But I'm happy to move the recommendations of receiving your report and noting the findings, but I do think that we should be formally thanking them on behalf of council. The thing I picked up, and I can't remember whether I read it or whether I'm thinking it, but you talked about playing catch up. We were playing catch up. And when you try and do that where you've already made decisions or partly made decisions, it's the old thing where we design something and put it out and then say to the community, what do you think of this? Rather than going to the community and saying, this is the issue. How do we harness your knowledge of the area and your enthusiasm and determination to make this a great place to live, to find a solution? And the difference between the two was we were playing that, well, this is already all happening in Arataki. No, we can't do that because this is happening, etc. So that getting in early when you want to, and even in LinksAV, had we gone to the community first and said, this is the issue, this is the problem that's here, it might have had a different pathway. So that's the learning that I've had from the process. But I think it's worthwhile that we try all these things and learn from them because, as we've found with the LinksAV, when you do actually empower people to get involved and make decisions about what's happening in their patch, they actually come up with some pretty good suggestions and solutions. And they're the ones that have got to live with them. So yes, we might put some criteria in place, but giving people that ability to make those decisions about what's happening in their neighbourhood is really, really powerful, both for TCC, but also for communities. And then the last question I was going to ask is, have we had a look at the program they put in front of us at the LTP hearings to see what in fact we've been able to tick off for them? Because that in itself would be interesting. And also keep in mind some of their aspirations as part of the spatial planning process that's going on.
Absolutely. So we've been reporting on that regularly through written reports, but I can bring that back to commissioners separately. But I did want to pick up one of the key aspirations that the group had right from the outset, and that was around a safe crossing over Girvan Road, connecting Arataki Park through to Bay Fair. We've got engagement actually happening on that this week. It was going to be part of the wider changes to do with Farm Street, but with that project paused, the transport team have moved to include it into transport choices because they recognised that independently of that, we couldn't wait. And we've had really positive feedback through the engagement that's already happened with the 2 local schools, that they're thrilled that there's going to be a safe crossing. And I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the completion date for that is due for July 2024.
June, July next year, yes. And we've been through the technicalities with Waka Kotahi as well on it, and they've got their support on that project. So that's going well.
That was number 1 on their list, I think. Yep. So I'm very happy to move those, but include a C that we thank all of those involved. Oh, right. Look at that. Yeah. Excellent. Done. Here's Stephen seconding it. Any other questions for Kaylee?
A comment, Chair, in response to Kaylee's comments about resourcing in terms of we establish groups such as this or with some variation of that resourcing commitment from the council. And key to that, and that's why I think it worked quite well originally when Joel was in place, was that relationship. So it's just not attending meetings and that, it's actually developing more of that personal relationship with members of those types of groups. So there is that the group feel probably safe and actually engaging and vice versa, and then being able to build on that established approach.
Just building on that, there is an opportunity with the new ward structure that is going to be in place for the elections from July next year, that there is appropriate staff representation at that ward level, because you could see a very clear relationship between the councillors from the ward and the community. And if we had capacity within the staff to be able to support that, then you've got a channel right the way down to each individual component of the city or each ward of the city. And there may well be groups within that working on particular issues, but at least at that sort of geographic area of the city, you would have a clear line of opportunity to engage.
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, I do want to support the comments in the report, and I think even the feedback, so the positive and the negative. I think it's given us some things to have a think about. But I kind of reflect on when we started and this thing was already in process, and it was really about how we connect with our community, understanding their needs and aspirations. And I take the point in the report as well that I think to focus on a particular, so whether it's a project in the area, we did stand up the skate group. So it was kind of a single focus delivery on that, and now it's under construction. So it'd be great to see the outcome of us working with community to deliver stuff. And I think a clear focus and clear direction on a particular, so whether it's a problem like Links have, or an opportunity, I think taking both. So I think, kind of for the future, looking for those kinds of opportunities where we can connect into communities, understand their aspirations, and then being able to work with them to deliver on those, I think is quite important.
Right. So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thanks, Kaylee. And thanks for doing the sort of the roundup of that, because it was quite a big project when we first came, and when you do those sorts of things, you do need to come back and just get that final, the good and the bad and the ugly, and learn from it. Okay, that brings us to the executive report. Oh, and we've wound ourselves up with a cup of coffee. So
starting with infrastructure again.
I've had my sugar content from Shad's daughter's chocolate chip cookies. Let's go.
Yeah, so from infrastructure, I hope it's a useful cross-section of activities across the group. Obviously, we do much more than build infrastructure, and there often the projects that we want to highlight in a report like this. So I won't mention either of them, not to leave anyone else out. I think they're equally important. So happy to go to questions.
I'm going to go first. When will the cycleway outside our building in Cameron Road there, when will that be open?
You're putting me to shame now. I will have to get back to you on
Thank
that. And
you.
I don't want to say a date or give you a date that we then can't commit to. So I'll look into that and get back to you.
I know Brendan's sitting at the back of the room there, but we did talk to him about it about 3 weeks ago and it was imminent. But I know it was
He's
closed.
happy to chip
I
in,
know
yeah.
it was closed because there was a near incident, but I've walked there quite recently and seen 2 near incidents because it's closed and people are still biking up and down there. Here he is.
I have an update this morning. So it was supposed to have been opened on Friday. So we're just chasing up why it wasn't open. There is some remedial actions to be undertaken, but we're hoping it'll be this week. So we're just waiting confirmation, but it's imminent. So we are chasing the JV.
I'll give you till Friday, then I'm going to go and knock down the barriers myself, I think.
I think our staff will be doing the same.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Bill and then Shad.
First, just as a comment, and I really supporting the comment in paragraph 11, and it was the last sentence, which I quote, over time, the focus for businesses along the road, this is Cameron Road, will change to meet the needs of an increased residential population in the immediate area, and the upgrades underway will cater for this changing environment. Just acknowledging, I thought that comment was right on the mark. It will take time in terms of that change occurring. But related to that, I had a question, and I think Chris, no one from Strategy and Growth. My question was, which can be answered later, in terms of the commercial hierarchy that there had been previous discussions about, and I'm not sure we're looking at that as in the mix of the potential changes to the district plan. So it can be noted and someone can come back to us on that.
Yeah,
just that the commercial hierarchy has worked, is working extremely well, which Hamilton introduced about 2013 or 14, in terms of the role of all of the commercial areas and centres throughout that city. So I just wanted an update on that, Chair.
Isn't that part of Plan Change 33, where we do have the start of that hierarchy?
Not in terms of the overall hierarchy. I accept there are elements in that, but it was just understanding of the overall hierarchy, which will bring, if we go down that path, it will bring challenges in terms of working through the process. But yeah.
Thanks, Sam. Just want to make a couple of comments about the Future Fit. So that's one of those online tools where you can kind of work out what your carbon footprint is. And I've done one of these before. So I catch the bus regularly or walk into town. Sorry? Try to cut back on my red meat. It's interesting, when I completed the survey, I was still way over, and what threw me over was I might be on a plane at least once a month, and and it just throws me right out. So it just shows, the impact, I suppose, that while trying to manage that, online meetings and not having to travel as much as what I used to, but still once a month does make a significant impact. But it's great to see that, there's 674 people that have signed up to it, and 10% of our, I think, what I did read, 10% of our staff. So I think every little bit kind of helps, and, we can make these little changes, whether it's with our waste, whether it's with our travel patterns, or the way we eat. I think we can make incremental changes to reducing the impact that we have when it comes to climate. I just wanted to make those comments.
I think when I went in, it was my international travel that threw me over, apart from anything else. Stephen.
Yes, I console myself by the fact that if I wasn't on the seat, the plane would still be going anyway. So at least that's my story. Look, I really just wanted to highlight the project management assurance section of the report, which notes that we're tracking at 87% of our capital program year to date and forecast to be around 90% in the infrastructure sector by the year end. And given the weather conditions that the whole region has experienced, I think that's a remarkably positive result. I really want to commend the staff for their commitment to get that program happening. And when we came here as commissioners, there's a strong story about capital program projects not going to plan and not going to budget. But we've trebled the capital program and infrastructure during the time that we've been here. And by and large, they are going to time into budget. So thanks to the team for that. It's a sterling result, and we look forward to being maybe 110% of program next year, but it's looking encouraging. Thank you.
I'll pass that on. Thank you very much. That'll be muchly appreciated. Cheers.
I have one more, well, I have a couple more. I just wanted to comment on the Harrison's Cut project. And picking up on Stephen, there are still members of our community that do not believe that we can complete projects on time and on budget, or even under budget. But really, that is an amazing project that Kelvin sent through the presentation that they did at the Stormwater Conference, and to see, after being told by various residents that there was no life, it was impossible to see the mass of life, particularly aquatic life, let alone skinks and whatever, that was there, was just astounding. And it's a fantastic project, and well done. I guess the question I have is from the Stormwater Conference, and it is this new approach to flood management being proposed in Auckland. And they're adopting a hazards to person approach. What does that mean?
Well, it means it means that you look at the impact of stormwater by the depth of the stormwater and the speed of the stormwater. We call it the depth by velocity index, basically, that you calculate so that if the water is at a certain speed coming down the whatever it is, footpath or street, whether a child or an adult can be pushed over by it. So it's the danger to the person, and we kind of just wanted to include that here because it was quite groundbreaking when TCC introduced it, probably as an initiative 8 years ago. I think we mentioned there. So obviously leading the field here, and it'll be good to see it introduced in other regions as well, because we recognise then, and others are recognising now, that you can't sort of just build yourself out of the stormwater issues by mitigating them happening. But the point is that you need to protect people from the dangers that they impose. We call it the D times V project. It's been here quite a number of times. So it's the depth times the velocity of the water that we look at. So it's a danger to people component.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to highlight, and I was quite interested, Nick, in terms of the reporting around TTOC, commencing on paragraph 20 in terms of using it, and then assisting police in terms of enforcement activity, and particularly, well, fair enough, not wearing seatbelts and mobile phones, but the running of the red lights. So this will presumably continue, this type of approach, but I presume it would also be aided by increased police presence and enforcement in some of those intersections, and then addressing issues such as the driving behaviour, and you've got an example there of Burrows Street. So it was just whether it would be, we've had some discussions with police around that, but it's just keeping on that case of having a presence there, because there's nothing like someone in a car to help dissuade people from some of those activities.
Yeah, that's right. So police presence is, of course, really, really important. The enforcement aspect of anything, any rules and regulations like that. We are looking at the cameras as well for the red lights. So the introduction of red lights cameras for red light running basically would be a step change in how we could manage the network in the city as well. So we are trying to fit that in, and we'll talk about that this afternoon into the budget. But that would be a very, very strong positive, because what we are having to do on where there is a lot of red light running on some intersections, we have to put safety first. We can't compromise that really. So we extend the facing of those, which means that there's actually unnecessarily waiting for a green, because we have to leave the red on longer to let conflicting traffic actually get through. And if we could get that phasing down, we'll be seeing better throughput. So it's one of those efficiency interventions that we can do at a relatively low cost, rather than building infrastructure or widening or anything else. That could actually be a good bang for buck, for want of a better term, but that's something we're looking at.
And it can be quite scary, particularly with heavy vehicles on some of the state highway, local road intersections.
In our discussions with the district commander, it isn't on the top on their priority list. Seatbelts, mobile phones, speed, and something else, and not red light running wasn't included in the mix. But I'm pleased we're now going back and having a look at those red light cameras. And in fairness, I've never seen whakatane drivers as courteous and quiet as they were over the weekend, with an increased police presence, particularly down the Matata Straits, I have to say, and Harbour Road. Yes, it was very good driving around. And it's a conversation I've had for many years with police, is just that presence makes people much more aware of the rules. So delighted to have those two community constables out in the CBD. It's terrific response from police. Okay, are we done on infrastructure? Community services?
Morning. Good morning. There's a lot in there, isn't there? But I'd just like to touch on three, please, if that's okay. Today's day one for having our customer service operating out of the Papamoa and the Greerton Library. It has been a little while coming. Every time we sort of think we're ready to locate there, we have some staff resign. So it has been a little while coming, but day one today, so it's great. And you'll note that we're in a program to plant almost 200,000 plants across the city over the next little while, which is good given the weather. It will be a challenge, but that's pretty promising. And the virtual reality project is pretty exciting. So that's the whole 3T option where you have some glasses, and when we go out to into events, we can actually show people what it's like if there is an earthquake or a tsunami. So I think that'll be a very useful tool for education, and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Barbara. I have to say, I think from our emergency management point of view, it would be good to link in with the Papamoa Residents and Ratepayers Association. The other night when we went out there, I was quite disturbed by what Philip Brown was presenting. I know his group is raising significant issues, and I know our team is having a good look at some of the solutions they're proposing. But actually there was some really misinformation that was being proposed, and and even unscientific information. I've checked up on it. I did raise some of this at the regional workshop that was held here on Friday with the wider regional group. But an 18-metre wave that was being talked about at that meeting is not on any of their radar. No, they're not talking about that at all. And a 50-minute interval to get clear is really misleading, because it all depends on what happens and where as to what the timing is. So I've suggested to the regional people that they link up with that group. But I also think that we should be linking up, because I really was worried that residents were getting a very wrong picture, and some of the people were really frightened. And I just don't, there's good to be teased out, but it has to be done in such a way that is based on proper scenarios.
So Paul and the team have met up with the group, and I think we've made steps. Philip has sent us through a copy of a presentation he plans to give. So we have an opportunity to amend that, because you're correct, there's a lot of misinformation in here. So I hope that's a step forward, but certainly I'll pass it on. We need to keep talking. There's a lot of misinformation.
Gave that presentation that night, so he's already out giving that presentation.
Okay. I thought he was checking in before he did it.
No,
that was the email anyway.
That was his opening, and there was almost a couple of hundred people there, and some of them spoke to me afterwards, really, really concerned, and not even a recognition that actually retirement villages, schools, all have their plans with the work that we did last summer. They all have plans in place, but so ongoing discussions I think would be well worthwhile. And I just wonder whether at some stage we don't need to put something in the Papamoa Post around some of the work that has been done and is being done.
I'll pick that up. Yep.
Barbara. I just want to make a comment about InStep. So I went to the InStep young leaders session on Friday, breakfast, with probably 25, 30 young people sitting around this table, actually. And it's great to have the Regional Council in Western Bay elected members here, along with staff in Priority 1. We did an exercise which was quite useful, a budgeting exercise. So we gave them a copy of, I wouldn't say it was actual, but looking at our LTP and getting them to think about what the priorities might be. And I got some notes back from the team. And so there were 3 groups, and probably the key themes that came through was around transport, so better transport options and choices across the city. They didn't get down into detail around costings and those kinds of things. But I did emphasise if you were to make some changes in one area, we've got to take it from somewhere else. So there's this balance that needs to occur. So transport was one of the key themes, better reliability when it comes to public transport, and more efficient delivery of our transport infrastructure. The other area that came through quite strongly was around our amenity and citywide amenity. So whether that was the investment we're making in the city centre, and as we heard before, so what are the things for that are provided for young people, teenagers through into their early 20s. Quotes of comparing us to Wellington and Auckland, and there's lots of different things to do in those areas, which is where we're seeking to invest, particularly in the city centre. There was a young guy who had done the program previously, who's now studying at Harvard, and was there to kind of encourage these young people as well. Interesting, he raised the question to all of these young ones sitting around the table, essentially saying, where are you going to be in 5 years' time? Are any of you going to be living here in 5 years' time? We're the 5th largest city in the country. And it was interesting, no one put their hand up to say, you know, I'm going to be here and I want to invest in the city. But I think, which highlighted to me that actually there's a bit of work we need to do to make this an attractive place for our young people to study and then to live. If they do go away and study, we do want to attract them back to make a contribution. Being the 5th largest city in New Zealand, 170,000 people and growing. So that kind of struck a chord with me, thinking about these young people. How do we make this an attractive place for them to be, to want to study, to want to live, to want to bring up their families and contribute? You know, I just wanted to make that point about InStep. Great program. The emergency management paper I found quite useful, and also picking up on Anne's points. I do have some ideas, particularly in that Papamoa eastern end, and I think it came through about, you know, how do we get people safely out of those areas. And then great to see the shared path development in Papamoa. I did go into the website and had a look at what's been planned. So there's opportunities for bike parks, there's some fountains in there. So it's not just a straight path, there's opportunities for people to get off their bikes and go for a swim if they feel the need. So I do want to make, you know, great to see the team kind of thinking about the needs of the community, and I'm sure a lot of those ideas and thoughts come through from the community.
Thank you.
Yeah, Bill. Yeah, I thought you were going to. Yeah.
Barbara, just, and I'm looking at on paras 64, 65, I think the commentary around the large grade trees in the centre boom and that more instant impact in terms of amenity improvements, but more particularly in terms of the tree planting, which you note business as usual, but certainly have upped the number of enhancement plantings. I just wanted to check in that then carries on an annual basis. So it's, in some ways, I see it's a bit like we're looking at in terms of what we should have done over a period of time in terms of maintaining, you know, whether it's roads or other facilities. It's really in terms of that tree planting, which tended to over times get cut out, but certainly upping that and the significance of it in terms of the increase in canopy, but also in terms of general amenity improvement. So it was just to check in that will as part of the annual process.
Absolutely, and I think the team talked passionately at AIP presentations about the need to identify what we have now. Yeah. And then actually start having a target, and then making sure that our planting, our BAU planting, is actually working to whatever that target is. And I think they were mooting 30%. I don't personally know whether that's reasonable or not, but they need to do that work and identify that. But certainly there is money every year for planting trees, and we'll continue to do so.
Challenged it recently at Bob Owens that our share of the 1 billion trees is 3 million.
Yes.
Oh. So, well, we're just counting how many we got now.
3 million. Okay.
I'm
not sure if we're going to achieve that.
No, I'm not sure.
Our best.
Can I just ask about? I forget where we were, but we noticed. I see under pest control the rabbit and pigeon populations have dropped, but the geese population seem to have quadrupled. Do we do goose control, or is that regional council?
I'm not sure. I know that there's an awful lot of different types of birds where I go walking. I will find out and answer that question.
I think
we do.
Hawke's Bay Regional Council do it. I'm not sure who does it here, but certainly the numbers were phenomenal.
I think when we look at our walkways and our wetlands, I think we have a general animal control program. I will get some details on geese.
Geese, thank you. Anything more? No, that Chief Financial Officer, Paul.
Just really an update on airport. Not a lot different to the past. It's a continuing good trend out there, and we've now secured the lighting, which has been under negotiations for some time there. And that upgrade will, the main benefit of that will be the ability to have more poor weather approaches and takeoffs effectively.
Good. And the consenting processes for that's all under control?
It's all under control, yes.
Good. Strategy, growth and governance. We haven't got anyone here to answer any questions, but that'll be you, Marty.
You collectively will do our best.
Anything? No. Corporate services.
She's just come back. I'll pad for you, CJ.
Tell a joke.
The engagement portal went live after a very short standing up period. The goal of this portal is to make it easier for the community to learn about community initiatives. And there's a couple of overlaps from today. The first is that if we want to make a connection with each ward, using digital channels is a great way of localizing the experience. So I think we're setting those foundation stones up there for future use. Over the last month, from a business continuity planning perspective, we undertook an exercise, including with our key suppliers, to find out what would happen if there was a cyber attack and we lost everything. So what could we do? Now, our suppliers are highly dependent on us for information and instructions. We learned more about what we can't do rather than what we can do, which is perfect. So there's lots of opportunities for us to work out that actually we are heavily technology dependent. I just would probably draw your attention to one other thing in the people section, and that is in the small graph in the bottom left-hand corner, in April 2021, our turnover of staff was 20%, and we're at 15%. And that's over a time where market competition for resources is quite high, and the council's obviously been going through a lot of initiatives and a lot of demand. And I think 15% the professionals are saying in local government's more than acceptable. And given where other councils are at right now, I think we're in a pretty good place going into a challenging time. We're also wrapping up remuneration as well, which is an exciting time for a lot of people in the organisation.
Talking in the lift to someone that had recently joined TCC, and I asked the question, so, what brought you here? And they said, the answer was, well, it's an exciting place to be at the moment. Which I thought was a real fill-up for the organisation, actually. Okay, any other questions? Yep.
Sorry, I bumped into somebody I hadn't seen for probably 10 years that I've worked alongside, and he worked in the private sector and is now working in council. And the same comment that came from him is he's never worked for a government before, an engineer, and working in the safety area, but he loves his job, and he's been here probably 6 months and really enjoying the challenge. And he was saying he didn't know why he had made this. Had delayed his move longer. Previously, he managed staff, and so he's moved into kind of more project management and managing projects, and it's kind of found a sweet spot. So just wanted to give you that feedback.
Both, these stories are appreciated. I think the quality of storytelling we give to our staff for senior leaders right through to staff is going to be really critical over the next couple of years. The reasons why we're doing things. There's a lot of ambition there, but now as these projects come on stream and we re-engage with the community in a different way, the why is going to make the difference between turnover going down and going up.
Looking after our staff too, valuing them, the job that they do. As Stephen just said earlier, that significant change in the organisation that's taken place over the last couple of years, and it's appreciated not only by us sitting around this table, but by the wider community. There's stuff happening, and people see it. Okay, regulatory and compliance.
One of the key updates that we wanted to provide you in this report was about the sale and supply of alcohol amendment bill. So the select committee have released their recommendations report. So we included a table from paragraph 147 that just talks about the tweaks that they have done to the proposal that was consulted on and whether or not that would have any potential impacts on our local alcohol policy. And you'll see in there very minimal impacts. It's really about process. And we wanted to confirm with you that provided that bill gets passed this year, that won't have a measurable impact on our local alcohol policy, and we won't need to reconsult. The timing will be fine with that. So just an important point for us. And just a couple of additional points is our objective build move for our building consents went really well. So we're getting some great reports from consultants and builders around this area that having a consistent portal between Western Bay and Tauranga is hugely appreciated. So that was great to see. We have a significant system upgrade for our resource consent process happening on the 1st of July. So that's that first part of moving into SAP. We have let consultants know, we have let agents know that this is happening and trying just to prepare them for a significant change. Hoping that it goes well, but we will keep workshopping that with consultants just to make sure that the experience is smooth.
Just on the local alcohol policy, I know in recent discussions that we had with the district commander, they're keen that we get on and make a decision around before the summer of that difference in opening time. If make a decision about whether we're going to change it or not, and I just wonder whether we shouldn't get on with making our local alcohol policy, making the decisions on that, and then. I mean, the legislation is obviously not going to make a huge amount of difference, and waiting to see. It's hard to know whether it's going to be passed this year or not. Don't know what the legislative program's like, but I just feel sort of hanging around. We've got everyone in limbo, not knowing what the rules are. And so I don't know. Can we get on and tidy it up, finish it off? And then we'll have to come back to it again next year anyway, don't we? So we can take account of anything changed then. But certainly going into the summer, the view from the police is if we make a decision on that open door and the different timing, that would certainly help them with the policing in the CBD.
We'll check in with the legal team just to make sure that that's something that we can do, but it's an excellent idea. We will look at those options.
Stephen.
Thanks very much for having code of compliance information in there. It's great to see it. And look, the reason I was keen to see those outcomes, at the end of the day, it's new homes built that people can live in. As Phil Twyford, I think, once said you can't live in a consent, which was his response to National's apparent failure to deliver more houses. But what I'm keen to see this progress, and I'm aware that there's some fantastic work going on by Alistair's team in terms of the how's it going analysis, which is really about understanding what is the trend in houses built and available for people to live in compared with the demand, and whether or not we're actually delivering enough houses. The concerning trend when you have a look at this particular graph is that things are obviously on the downturn as we understand the markets turned cold, and you can see that both in terms of a decline in consents and a decline in CCCs issued. So I guess the question that comes from that is, okay, so what does this mean in terms of our ability to meet demand? And I'm looking forward to the time when we'll be able to answer that question a bit more constructively. But it's good to have this data coming through. Personally, I think it's more helpful to see a line graph rather than a bar graph, because you can see the trend. I mean, you can kind of read it here, but a line graph shows you whether you're going uphill or downhill, as the case may be. But thank you for that. I think it's something we need to keep on top of. And as we develop our reporting and understanding of our supply and demand curve, that'll help us understand where we're at and what we need to do to fix it. So thank you.
Note that we've received a letter from Minister Woods following the Loafers Lodge fire and fatalities. Sarah will be aware, but just to make sure that everyone else is, I think she's writing to all the councils, written to all the councils around the country asking for information on just under building compliance and the checks that we do. So Sarah's team will be responding, giving me a response to go back.
Sorry, if I may, I forgot to ask a question in relation to my comments. So the CCC tells us how many new houses are now being delivered. Do we have any understanding of how many houses are coming off the market? You know, they've been replaced by a new house, or they're now run down and uninhabitable, because it's the kind of net increase that's material to our housing supply. And is there any way that we can assess that?
Not to my knowledge. We could interrogate some of the building consent data to look at what might be upgrades and rebuilds, but it would be quite difficult. And I'll talk to Steve and the team to see if there might be a proxy measure that we could use.
There's definitely something wrong with the technology in this building. We're not a particularly old city either, with a lot of old Edwardian and Victorian, or even some of those bungalows that were built after the war when the building materials were pretty short in supply. So there probably isn't a lot, but it would be interesting to know what what is the housing stock and how much is it increasing each year. Must be a way to do that. Because we would condemn houses that weren't fit for habitation, wouldn't we? Under the building consent legislation.
They would be unsanitary houses, and we would have that information, but still not where somebody is just replacing old for new on their own section. But if we can't get it, we can get that information from this point forward, though. The building consent team can capture that information going forward. Yeah.
Anything else? Yeah, Bill.
Some bouquets, Sarah. And it's certainly just acknowledging that the aspiration to get that allocation of consents down to BCOs down to 1 week, because at 2 weeks, that's half of the, just about half the statutory timeframe. So that focus is really good, as is getting the average time for issuing consents to 13.2. So, well done for the team with that focus. I did have, what was my, Stephen's covered off on the CCCs, and also taking that risk-based inspection regime for building warrant fitnesses. And it is actually assessing that. So not everything gets treated the same. So just acknowledging that. And I think that was, they were the 3 comments I had. I'll just check.
While he's checking, can I just question on the noise complaints? So with a lot of roadworks going on around the city, it came through to us that if people make a complaint about road noise, road construction noise at night, and it goes through the normal noise complaint system, we require more than one complaint. And so people were being put off because no one else was complaining. So we separate out road construction noise complaints from normal type noise complaints?
That's a good question. From my knowledge, no, we don't. And the way we deal with our noise complaints, and it's particularly important because it's a 24/7 service, is that we receive our first complaint and note that down. And when we receive the second complaint, then we will go out and inspect. And that, it doesn't cover off those concerns people will have with noise for construction at night. It's more about noisy parties and things like that. But I'll check with the team. I do know that if there is construction noise concern, though, we would let the contractors know immediately. So I'll follow that up and make sure we're closing those loops.
I think what we've found in the two cases I'm aware of, the resource consent was not being followed. So the complaints were correct, but our processes didn't necessarily flow through. I think that would be fair to say. So it is quite important with a lot of construction happening, and a lot of it has to be done at night because it's on major thoroughfares. We just keep going, I think. So yeah, it'd be quite good if you could just follow that through. Anything else, Bill?
And it related, I'm under environmental health, Sarah, in terms of the commentary around food premises, no issue in terms of what the team are doing, in terms of friendly reminders for those to renew. However, at the end of the day, having a valid food premise licence is part of doing business. So the obligation is on the business to make sure that they don't expire or are renewed within the time frame. The reason I raise that, because there's some commentary about the extra cost on business if they expire. Well, the business needs to be well aware of their obligations. It's no different to the business having a liquor license and letting that expire, and then we get a whole lot of emails saying, well, help me. Well, that's part of how you run your business. So I just wanted to make that clear, that it's not just on the council in terms of all of that process.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm just on page 135. Yeah, 135. Just in terms of Sanderson's with their fast track consenting process, do we have any idea about timeframes for processing and then decisions on that?
The critical decision right now is for the minister to determine whether she'll accept, which we're just waiting for confirmation about whether that can be released. That decision can be released right now. And once we've got that, we can update you on exactly what their timeframes are, because it's a reduced process, and they aim to get those decisions out, just like the Ministry of Justice fast track process, very quickly. So we can provide you an update once we've got confirmation of a public decision, what those timeframes will look like.
Okay, city development and partnerships, Gareth.
Te mare e tātou. I'll take the report as read. Just wanted to pick up on your comment about police on the beat in the city centre. So I'm very pleased that that's started happening. Daily basis at different times of the day. So as not to establish a routine, but still to have a presence. But in addition to that, we've seconded someone from Community Services, Paul Mason's, in the city on the ground many days of the week, along with someone from our team, and just starting to make connections with businesses, with people that spend time in the city centre and build relationships. And that's working really well. One particular example, there's a woman in Red Square that was loitering, if you like, and Paul struck up a conversation and bought her a hot chocolate
And that resulted in a couple of phone calls and we found her somewhere to live and she was homeless. So, just that one person to person interaction has resulted in a really good outcome for a member of our community that was in need, but that was also causing some issues in the city centre to businesses. So just in a really short space of time, it had some positive impact. The other positive impact in the city centre is the recent changes to downtown Tauranga and the appointment of the new chair. That's working really well. A really positive problem-solving attitude to everything that's going on, because we all know there are challenges, but Ash and the board are coming to the table just with a positive lens on everything and looking to work with us to try and find solutions. So that's really refreshing. Then the only other thing really was just the plethora of projects that are either about to start or nearing completion, and we're just barreling on with all of those. Happy to take any questions.
Cool.
Thanks, Gareth. I'm on the Marine Parade Coastal Pathway project, and you've noted that there's an application for 1.4 million to MB's Tourism Fund. If that is successful, is that covering off on any additional costs, or is there a 1.4 million of ratepayer funds available for other work?
I do not know. I will need to check.
Says hopefully. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah, shared.
I just had a query about the Te Hononga Ki Te Awanui, that's the stage 1 walkway, and the connection into Tunks next door. Because in between we've got the regional council and they've got ideas about the harbour master. Are we connecting in to make sure that we've got alignment across what we're doing this end to that end and put the regional council in the middle?
Yes, definitely. Regional council are actually in public consultation at the moment for their plans for down that area with their boat launching facilities. So that was a project from 2 or 3 years ago that kind of shelved for a while, but that's recently come alive again, and we're absolutely talking to them, because you're right, by the end of this year we will have finished the railway underpass and the new boardwalk. We'll be finishing Tunks Reserve and Elizabeth Street East, and then there'll be a gap between the two of them. So what does that look like? And regional council are a key partner in that conversation. So yes is the answer.
Can I ask, please, what's happening with the Harrington Street car park?
They have issued all of their consents, I believe, and they are in construction. Started about 5 weeks ago, due to be completed May next year.
Of the car park?
6 stories of car parks, approximately 380 car parks.
That's going to make a big difference down that end of town. Anything else? Okay, so where are we? Got quarter of an hour. Oh, sorry, the other question I had on Memorial Park, I just can't remember from the LTP, but were we putting a climbing wall on the end of that? I just remember the climbing, I don't know what they call themselves, the climbing association, or the wall climbing people made a presentation at the LTP, and I thought that we were including that as part of the Memorial Park upgrade.
I do remember that presentation as part of the LTP, and I think our commitment to them at the time was to work with them to try and find an industrial space that could work for their needs in the short term. Happy to check to see if we've included it in the scope for what happens at Memorial Park.
Okay. So Bill's moved and Shad second. We received the executive report. Thank you very much. All those in favour say aye. Against carried. We have no late items. That brings us to the public excluded. Just before we do that, so we haven't got a big agenda. I'm just looking. I think we'll finish the public excluded, have some lunch, and then we're scheduled to be back for a workshop at 2, we'll probably be starting 1:30, do you think? Or you want to leave it at 2? Just for the media leaving.
We'll get a workshop any time.
1:30? You happy? Sorry? We can live stream the workshop. Yes, a public workshop. What time is lunch delivered? 12:30. Is that enough time? Half an hour? I mean, it's an hour, but we might not finish by 12:30 unless you keep going because it's 12:15. Yep, 3/4 of an hour. Yep. So 1:30 for the workshop to start. Thank you. Okay, would someone like to move that we go into public excluded for the reasons outlined on the agenda? Moved by Bill, seconded by Stephen. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Now we've stopped recording. Thank you.